options to support diversity in sugarcane farming systems in Northern Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. My name's Tony Matchett. I run a small business out of Cairns called Savannah Ag Research, and just going to run through what I consider to be another important part of the cane farming system. So we're going to have a look at cane as the obvious pillar crop for Northern Australia, factors affecting crop choices, how we go about evaluating different options to include in our fallow, and how we go about developing those rotational systems. Have a look at some of the numbers around making those choices, and then think about some of the current limitations around supply chains for introducing some new crops. Just a few points to remember. So I'm talking to the people that are the innovators and the leaders of seeing change occur for the benefit. So it's the people that aren't in this room that really need the help that this room's giving to me. Coming from the outside, from a grains industry background, cropping systems, it just comes to second nature, but I think there's people that not in this room that need to be. I learned so much last week at Regen Cane and again today that I think there is a future. But I do understand that there are some industry levers that are put upon the industry, which makes it a bit of a challenge. And these are just general comments that I'm making. Don't show the achievements that are being made by all of you as the leaders in the cane system. As I said, I'm from a grains industry background, so I have to say that I realise that every situation is different, and I don't know it all when it comes to cane. I can hardly spell it. Sugarcane, a 4 to 5 year monocrop with a short fallow cycle, obviously in the coastal environment. But I see that the production system is not driven by growers, but more driven by the mills. And that concerns me that the focus is, rather than on productivity, it's on production. Benefit you have is you have a guaranteed market, but often just a single mill to sell to. And industry whole, we know that the long-term declining productivity curve has been there since last 80s and 90s, so it's been around for a long time. So what has to be the next change for the industry? Is it going to be a continued sequence of small iterations, or is it time for a pivotal change to the direction of cane? And how does the industry, through programs like Catalyst, try and address this constant bombardment of challenging your social licence to grow cane as you do? All of you guys grow it with productivity in mind. So when choosing additional crops or any crop, we think, first of all, do we have market access and infrastructure to support that particular industry? What's our cost of production and our return on investment and our risk to take on different additional options? And then what are some of the constraints around soils and climate and the length of our growing season? What resources we have access to? How the seasonal conditions play out with regards to accessing fields during the year? And whether or not those particular crops have a fit within the system and bring benefits to that. And are they adding value to the whole business, whether that's direct to the productivity of the cane, or it could be indirect by additional income, as an example. So if we look at the different sets of crops that we have able to be considered, we obviously always start with how legumes fit into a rotational system, because they bring nitrogen, they can help with weed control. And so some of the choices we have, mung beans has been a popular one up here so far because of its short season, and we do have access to markets for that and flexibility around when it can fit into that rotation. Chickpeas could be a very good legume to include in rotations, most likely in the southern areas closer to Mackay where there's market access. Lupins is a good crop as a legume, but also fits into acid soils very well. Some of the newer ones like pigeon peas and actual cow peas as a grain crop are things that will develop over time. And then in particular situations, peanuts is another good legume. In the oilseed space, we've got the obvious soybeans. Sesame is a big one of interest of mine to see a sesame industry start up here in the north of Australia. Safflower is gaining in a bit of interest for its ability with its big deep taproot to assist with soil compaction and handle a bit of salt conditions. Carinata is in the brassica family, so it fits into that mustard and radish type group that are very good for biofumigation, for soil disease control. And a stakeholder that's very interested in seeing Carinata develop, which is New Seed. They like it because in the cane system, they believe they're able to capture sustainability credits within the cane system that'll not only benefit the cane, but also the value that growers can capture from growing Carinata up here. So the work we've done over the last 3 years on Carinata shows it as very encouraging indeed. And then there's a whole range of other oilseed crops that some are quite specialty, but others are getting widely more adapted, like sunflowers. And then it could be a food or a feed situation that you're interested in looking at because of an additional enterprise, which might be a livestock industry, or it could be just to diversify markets. So something like rice, which is starting to develop as an industry in the north, has a fit in places. Could be some of the coarse grains like sorghum and maize, or in that superfood space, crops that I've looked at up here that certainly grow well and have a fit in the farming system is something like quinoa or buckwheat. And buckwheat's an interesting one because you can grow a crop of that in 70 days. So in a very short, tight window or opportunity, buckwheat could fit it in something like that. So I look at the length of maturity of different crops, soils, put the whole thing together and say, for this particular circumstance, this grower here, what are the potential options to consider? And then we've obviously got the ability to add cover crops into our fallow period because they're so important to the health of our system. So diverse mixed species cover crops. Two of particular interest to our commercial business is sun hemp, which seems to be a pillar in most of the cover crop mixes we're seeing. An interesting new one that we're looking at doing seed increase on is velvet bean, so used in cover crops across Asia. Super fast growing and would fit well in a blend with sun hemp as its trellis because they both grow so fast. And then you mix into those things like your brassicas, buckwheat or cowpeas as additional components. I think the cover crop, you had 12 in your mix. I think mine at my last field day, I called it KFC because I had 11 herbs and spices in it. So when we're developing that system and with rotations, a few more considerations. So what is the length of the fallow cycle we're trying to target? We've got, it's going to be unique to the system and the environment and the resources we have available. And then practical considerations around which round is going to be your plough out. When is your plant cane window likely to be for your situation? Is it getting that fallow period finished in April so you can plant before it gets too cold, or are you a late planter so you could carry that cycle through a bit longer and plant in August if it's too wet? Whether you've got irrigation or not makes a decision on how we structure the rotation and start thinking about herbicides both from a rotational perspective so that we don't start to generate any resistance issues, but also residues. And what we've used potentially in our cane or the other fallow crops and what impact they might have on the following ones. something like imazapic or flame, the brassicas don't like that, and they don't like it for a number of years afterwards. We think about market factors and access, but some of the options that I put on the next page is looking at that extended fallow. And by looking at that extended fallow period, does that mean at the back end of our cane cycle we're able to extend our ratoon phase and pick up the production that the mills need with no net gain to the amount of acres that are being harvested each year, because you've used that fallow period to create a more healthy, sustainable cane system that can grow for longer. So, if we get into the rotation, just a few different options here. You can obviously use that cover crop at the start, or even middle, or the finish of that cycle. Is that cover crop going to be a single or a multi-species? And I only put that up there in terms of the ability to use herbicides during that phase. So mixed species, we're likely to only be able to control grass weeds, but some of the single species cover crops give us more access to broadleaf weed control as well, if that's a particular issue in a set paddock. For heavy soils, I like crops in a rotation. It could be, let's assume that your fallow block is your late plough out. So you could grow a semi-irrigated or a rain-fed rice crop over summer, follow that up with a safflower crop over winter, spring, and then terminate that cover crop if you wanted to go and plant cane the following April early. Or if you're in a feed market or a mixed farming system, you might grow your cover crop and get it up 3 metres tall and create a heap of biomass. There's a lot still underground that's been happening, but you could capture some of the value out of that as a hay crop, and then look at some of the feed grains like maize and soybeans. If water is one of your key limiting factors in your system, some of those drought tolerant crops like sesame is very heat and drought tolerant. Quinoa also performed really well over winter, spring with minimal water. Or if cost is a decision for you, it could be a sorghum, buckwheat, and then finish off with a sun hemp crop. Or if you're looking at an early cut, so your first round is where you're starting your fallow phase. Once you get that country ready, you could go in with a spring mung bean crop before you go into that summer period, and then either keep it going or still give you an extended fallow. Won't be 12 months, but a good break where you've got more than just one crop in that fallow period. So I've just put up here just a snapshot of some of the numbers. Obviously they're unique for every person and every situation, but just to put some sort of ballpark figures around what sort of value we want to bring or invest into our farming system, what those gross margins look like. Obviously the value of all commodities go up and down, but also think about things like cost of production and what that means as a risk profile and getting return on that investment, so that it is a net value proposition, and then also consider water as a factor, that what availability of that you have. And then in some of the following scenarios, I've just used a $300 per hectare investment to put in a cover crop. So I had sugarcane there as just a benchmark for $2,400 per hectare per year. That's averaged over a plant, and I think I can't remember if I used 3 or 4 ratoon crops in that scenario. But then over that next period, where for 15 to 17 months we've got an extended fallow period, that sort of gives you an idea of what a gross margin combined in that fallow period could add to the farming business, and how much water you would need to do that. And how does that model fit with the health of the entire business? Some of the constraints though, so in Northern Australia, the struggle is that for all of these other crops and options that I've been talking about, is we're lacking the supply chain to support them in a lot of cases. So we don't have grain corp style storage, handling, drying, processing, packing type capacity. A tick, yes, we've got Sunrise with their Brandon mill and ability to toll pack other commodities like mung beans. There's growing activity around the Townsville port for the capability to containerise and export grains out of there, which is exciting. And we've also got huge demand for proteins and meals that could be byproducts of some of the value-adding processing we're looking at doing to some of these grains. So there are some ticks, but there's some real challenges. That a lot of those things that I spoke about, they're not shelf-ready food products. They need some level of processing, and that needs to flow. And something like the oilseeds at the moment, if you're doing bulk oilseed production, the nearest crushing capacity is Kingaroy, so freight's a huge factor for us to consider. We know that investment in infrastructure brings industry. So we've got sugar mills. If you put in a cotton gin, cotton will come. We know there's a rice mill there, but they need additional capacity for storage and drying, and if they had that, with the mill throughput, they could increase that capacity of rice from 10,000 to 25,000 tonne, but they need further storage and handling to do that. So one concept I've floated in front of the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility is that, is there a place for shared grain facilities? So rather than a cotton gin being built there and a rice mill over there and an oilseed crushing capacity over there, they all need a lot of shared facilities, whether it's a weighbridge, an office and testing and packing and all of that, the industries that I'm talking about that take a foothold in the north and sugarcane farming system to help its productivity, but also help the health of the community. That sort of support's out there. But there's still some R&D and studies that need to be done, and I'll touch on that a bit more tonight. But to see the great work in cover crop species is great, but there's further work to be done. So what we're doing at sort of a proof of concept stage, our business. So we're looking at developing Australian-grown supplies of key cover crop species like sun hemp, some superfoods like quinoa. We've got a licence to commercialise quinoa here. We're developing our first line of coloured rice, and we think something like cowpeas as a tropical pulse has a real fit in the future for plant-based proteins, or other industries like soybeans could expand on the back of a growing aquaculture industry. And we've also set up a proof of concept oilseed crushing facility at Cairns to look at what the potential value is of supporting those industries develop. And as I said, the meals that come off of, whether it's pulses for protein or oils, there's no waste in the system, whether it's soybean meal going into the aquaculture industry or it's sesame meal going into muesli bars. Everything can get utilised. So that's it. Any questions?
If there's no questions for Tony, I'd just like you to put your hands together for him, please.
Thank you.
The third and final presentation for this afternoon is Jamie Dorr and Teresa Rickson, Reef Credits. If they could come forward, please.
All right. Most of you guys would be aware of who I am. I think I know most faces in the name. But anyway, I'm Teresa Rickson. I've been with Trap Services, or created Trap Services almost 10 years ago. And Doors were one of my first clients coming on board privately, doing agronomy work for them. So we've been working together for 10 years, as I said. Jamie's a second generation cane farming, basically? Fourth, technically. There you go. Skipped a generation in there somewhere. So it has had a long association with farming. If they weren't farming cane, they were grazing cattle. So had a fair association. And he's had a lot to do with the development of Reef Credits. So I'll hand you over to Jamie.
Thanks, Carissa. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the sponsors and all the organisers for putting on another great event. I realise it's late in the day. It's after lunch. There's no one siestering under the tables there at all. So we'll try and be quick anyway and move through it. So yeah, Chris and myself have been asked to present on the Reef Credits experience very much from the growers' point of view. And many of you growers and service providers in the room through Project Catalyst are what we consider to be cutting edge. You know, you see very much at the forefront of practice change, nutrient use efficiency, all those sort of things. So hopefully, you know, the Reef Credits platform is something that'll be of interest to you. Look, I can do that. So yeah, how do we get involved? So there's a couple of people in this room who were there with us right from the start, Mike Berwick and Joseph Morano. So we were involved through the Wet Tropics Major Integrated Project, is how this all sort of got cooked up. Many of you in the room are probably familiar with the MIPS. So if you're not, the Wet Tropics Major Integrated Project, that's a bit of a mouthful, but the MIPS were, you know, they're an initiative that was funded by OGBR and DES, and there's about 34 million, something like that, Joe? 36 million? Only a couple of million out. Anyway, yeah, it's a lot of money, and it was put together to sort of bolster, you know, initiatives, and you know, a lot of stuff was done, like bioreactors and treatment systems. The water quality monitoring has been a big aspect of it as well. And Reef Credits was one of those initiatives that came through the innovative financing sector of that MIP. Yeah, so it was funded by OGBR. So that so there was a consortium partnership. Sorry, 40 consortium partners that came from industry, from science, you know, government, and they all came together to work on these projects. So I entered as a beta phase participant in the Reef Credits project, which is also known as the guinea pig, and Joseph Morano was a guinea pig as well. And we entered just to test the economic and legal principles of a new scheme, if you like, for industry. So yeah, that's about that. So what is a reef credit? So I'd say that my definition anyway is reef credits are a voluntary water quality market mechanism. You know, so they're a voluntary market mechanism. These things are new sort of concepts for Australia anyway. They've been around other places for a while. And a reef credit is, well, the first point's probably the most useful. A reef credit represents a quantifiable volume of nutrient, sediment, or pesticide reduction that has been prevented from entering the Great Barrier Reef catchment. And in order to understand how this works, these voluntary markets, I think the concepts you need to grasp are around baseline establishment and additionality. Those two concepts sit underneath how these things work. Well, that's my interpretation. They're probably the two most important factors, I believe. And, you know, record keeping and being able to prove and be audited, and for it to sort of stand the pub test is important. Because the buyer on the other side has to have confidence that it's a real thing. Because in commodities, you get paid for something, you know, usually get paid for something happening. We're used to supplying a physical product to a market. In these markets, you get paid for something that would have happened, but it didn't. So there's a famous quote from Dan Welsh about carbon offset markets. Offsets are an imaginary commodity created by deducting what you hope happens from what you guess would have happened. So I don't know if that's helped. That probably hasn't helped. Probably shouldn't have done that. But anyway, sorry, Mike and Tristan. You'll have to sort all these problems out later on. But all jokes aside, it's very new, and it's foreign to us as commodity producers. because, you know, for commodity producers like most of you in the room, you know, if a ton of sugar or a ton of grain is a ton of grain or a ton of sugar. You know, I can sell it on the ice exchange tonight or the seabot or whatever it is, and there's very little slippage between, or, you know, basis risk between the financial product and the physical product. So when you get into the realm of these voluntary markets, you know, that basis is wide. It's massive because it relies on so much methodology and modelling, if you like. But you know, as we get better science and monitoring over time, these gaps will start to close. You know, there's been a lot of work done on, for instance, blockchain, you know, supply chain accreditation and all that sort of stuff. Bonsucro and cane growers are working on that sort of stuff now. So I think I've got to throw over to you in a minute, Carissa. So I'll talk a bit about methodology. So methodologies and record keeping are important for establishing baselines and for measuring the additionality. So, you know, you've got to establish a baseline of where you're at, and then you have to measure the difference in what you've done and what the outcome was. So at present, there's four foundation methodologies in play, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tristan, I think 1 and 3 are up and live and running. Yeah. So we've entered under the first one, under, you know, reduction method for accounting reduced nutrient runoff through fertiliser management. Now the first two are related to DIN, and the second two are related to sediment. And so we've generated credits under that first methodology, and then other credits and methodologies might come forward, but they've got to be you know, endorsed, public consultation, and then they have to be put through the technical advisory groups, and then the secretariat who run all this will house those methodologies, and then they can be used and applied. So how do we generate them, the reef credits? Carissa, over to you.
Okay, so to go through this, there was a lot of record keeping required. Fortunately for doors, I have a bad habit or a good habit, one or the other, depending on who you're talking to. I archive everything. So everything I've done for them for the last 10 years has been meticulously filed on my computer. So we were able to provide the 7 years of historical data of fertiliser records and soil tests to Green Collar to establish a baseline. So that was our big jump for the first thing, was establishing our baseline. And then we've been able to show that as part of standard practice, DORs do legume fallows, and depending on how good that legume fallow is as to whether we'll discount a little bit of nitrogen off the plant crop where we've had legume fallows that have been successful. If they've been dismal, we will just leave it where it is. And that is very much influenced by the weather in our region and time of when the harvest's finished to get them in. And the other place where we generated a lot of our reef credits is on their last return crop before they fallow it. So through trials that we've done earlier, we know the productivity, we know the yield potential of those crops is a lot lower, and we've reduced our nitrogen from roughly about 130 units of nitrogen on our return crops. For the last return, we drop it down to 100 units of nitrogen. So we're being able to get a credit for reducing that 30 units of nitrogen. We're improving our NUE because we're not losing any yield by doing that. We're not cutting our nitrogen just to get reef credits. We're cutting our nitrogen in areas where we know we can cut it without losing any productivity and improve our NUE. So that's probably the main areas where we've gained it with the system. The other area for these guys is that they have quite a large fallow. So they aim for plant and first, second, third, fourth return, and then a fallow. So they have a roughly 17.5% of their farm fallow at any one time. They generally don't replant. I say that cautiously. We try not to replant, but this year's just gone and hit us with a big whammy. The other thing to note is initially this was going to be a sign up lock in for 10 years. Due to Jamie being our guinea pig, it's been made quite aware that that doesn't work in the cane industry. Our fallow area changes year from year, so this is very much on a year-on-year basis. It's not do it once and lock it in for 10 years. You evaluate it every year.
Thanks, Carissa. Yeah, so, there's a lot of myths around about, you hear slogans lately, or hear them about going below 6 easy steps and all this sort of thing, but Carissa hates that term because, if you're following the process correctly, that's, you don't go below 6 easy steps. It's a process that you use, and you use the science behind it to evaluate and reevaluate. So, going below 6 easy steps is not what we're doing. We're using steps 5 and 6, basically. When you hear steps 1 to 4, we're using the full 6 easy steps to get, better results. But that takes a lot of work. A lot of soil testing, a lot of nutrient management planning, and, a lot of work on soil health. So, yeah. You're going to drive this, are you? So this is an old slide. It's probably outdated a little bit now, this overview, but the nuts and bolts of it are that there's an initial assessment. So a broker or a project developer will, like Green Collar, will come forward to a farmer, and there'll be an initial assessment, to see if you've got a chance of, if it's got legs. Then you'll go through, you've got to establish a baseline, so it's all the record keeping. You've got to have good records. If you can establish a baseline and then apply it against the methodology and register, then you can develop the credits and then have them put on the registry. So since this slide has been up, we've established the Eco Markets Australia not-for-profit secretariat. So the secretariat has a registry, and it houses the credits, and it controls the volume and the sales and the price. Well, it doesn't control the price. It monitors the price and volume, if you like, of the credits, and helps become the marketplace to match the buyer and the seller. So now that the registry and secretariat's up and running, our credits been registered, and then HSBC, Green Collar, negotiated with HSBC to sell those, to buy the credits off us, and then they retire them. So the original idea behind Reef Credits was to try and get other money in, other than government, and we wouldn't take any of the government money. We wouldn't sell our credits to the government. We made sure that we wanted this to be a market mechanism. If that's what it is, we want it to be that. And HSBC, bought them. Other corporates have to fulfill their corporate social responsibility and their ESGs, and individuals. If someone wants to offset their carbon when they fly with Qantas, which not much of that's happening lately, but if they want to go to the reef, and there's not much of that happening either, but they buy a credit. They might want $10. I'm helping the reef. So these things are they're a real thing, and they're going to gather momentum, these voluntary markets. So many of you might have heard of Vera and the gold standard and all those sorts of things. So they're creating biodiversity credits and all these other sorts of things. And corporates are valuing them on their balance sheet, and they've got to fulfill their corporate social responsibility. So where to from here? Is that not working? Oh, you're driving now. All right, so the next steps, where are we at? We're at the stage now where, we've been the guinea pigs. We're going to have a reevaluation. We're going to sit down and go through this with Green Collar, with cane growers, and we want to really get to the bottom of what's the net benefit to growers. Because, it's only the Reef Credits is a small percentage of your turnover, your annual turnover. It's not big bickies. You're not going to chase Reef Credits, if you're going to lose productivity, or you're going to, put yourself at risk in other ways. And all these things are price sensitive, of course. At $650 a tonne of sugar, you're not going to be worried about any of this sort of stuff. You're going to be worried about production and price. So, in our instance, the price was low. We had big fallows. You know, so it worked out. But, you know, N is the cheap component of the farming system, as you all know here. If you want to reduce N, you know, you got to spend big bucks elsewhere usually to get your soil, you know, your buffering and your pH, and you got to, you know, phosphate and calcium and mag and trace elements and control traffic and, you know, reduce tillage, all the, you know, all the GPS systems we've got. We've got 10 GPS, 7 GPS systems or something. You know, all that costs money, and that's what we're hoping is that these corporates really bring some co-investment to help with that, because that costs big bucks. And I think that what we've noticed is the governments are really concentrating on just that N figure over here. And I know all you guys in the room, especially the service providers, concentrate on the whole nutrient management argument. So that's where we're at. We're going to, and the acid test is what happens when there's a change in circumstances. And guess what? This year there's a change in circumstances. We've had a drought. We've had failures in our planting. We're going to have to replant. We haven't replanted for 30 years, I don't think. 25, 30 years. Since, oh yeah, Yasi we did, yeah. So, you know, but before that, never. And that's what, you know, so that's going to probably wipe out our reef credits. So anyway, we out of time? Yep. Yeah, all right, mate. Okay, any questions, I suppose?
Yes, questions, please. Just hang on, we'll just get the microphone to you, thanks.
On getting these reef credits, you've started, like Carissa said, you had data collected, say, 7 years ago or more. How does it work as far as getting credits now? If I was to start right now, I haven't got data from 10 years ago, and so I'm starting now at a high level base on the farm as far as doing everything right. So compared to if I was starting at a low base farming, doing things, I suppose you said old school, not right. So if you're already starting at a very high level, BMP credited, Bonsucro credited, this and this, how do I achieve a reef credit? Because my margin to go any better is basically not there compared to a farmer that's doing something wrong, yeah, and farms better and gets a reef credit.
Okay, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer it through telling you a story about your kids brushing your teeth. All right? That's what we were talking about before. Look, you got this issue about grandfathering, you know, and we're yet to get to the bottom of that. We've got to have a bit more of a debrief on that. But, you know, you got one kid and they won't brush their teeth, and the other kid's been brushing their teeth for years. So you say to the kid that hasn't been brushing their teeth, I'm going to give you $5 every time you brush your teeth. And then the other kid comes and says, hey, Dad, you owe me bloody 100 grand for brushing my teeth for the last 10 years. So there's an issue with the early adopters versus the latecomers. Okay, and we're yet to go through how that grandfathering, or if there's still a grandfathering component, and the start of the project date is important as well. So how far you go back and when you start the project. And I think the reason Carissa introduced us in the last room by saying that we couldn't apply anymore for reef trust for the reverse tenders or any of that, because we've already done everything, pretty much, you know. And many of you in the room here now are at the stage where you can't do any more. You know, you wait for something else, and you hit the wall. Like the dog's got to the end of the chain is what's going on. So yeah, the early adopters, you know, in a way, it's like you get penalised. Not penalised, but how do you get?
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head, because that's what I'm saying. Basically, I can understand why they've set the system up, but the way I look at it is, overall, as far as green collar and the reef credits, you're rewarding in a sense a bad farmer. I know you turn him into a good farmer, but there's no credit there for the guy that was doing the job better in the first place. As such, he's getting no recognition at all, and doesn't qualify for a reef credit.
Maybe Mike Berwick might want to answer this one, because I've lost touch with what's happened with that actually.
Yeah, that's the big criticism that we get, but all environmental markets have got that the problem. I think the brushing the teeth is a good example. But if you put yourself in the position of someone wants to buy an improvement to the reef, they're not going to pay for something that's already been done. They're going to pay for an improvement. And so that word additionality that Jamie raised at the beginning is common to every environmental market in the world. It's got to be additional to what's already there. And I don't know what you can do to reward people like in this room who've been doing the right thing for years. And I copped it in the neck all the time from everyone who had done the right thing and said, I'm going to dip out. True. But you can't sell something that's already happened. You can go to market and say, you pay some money and we'll get this improvement. And those people are interested in the improvement in the reef and the environment. And there's just no way out of it.
Yeah, fair comment, Mike. Another question?
Yeah, on that subject, I believe most of the people in this room are just out of that particular market, simply because we're ahead of the game. But anyhow, besides that, the other aspect that I have is quite a optimistic vision, but it has a downside. The optimistic vision is the ones that can get the reef credits are going to be hard to get reef credits, but they're going to disappear. Because everybody's going to move to 2050 and there's nobody's going to be wanting to buy reef credits because they'll all be good.
Yeah.
And not making emissions.
Yeah, well, fair comment. I mean, look, I think we're all in the same boat. In Catalyst, how long's Catalyst been running now? 13 years. And I think that we've all gone through that journey where all the low-hanging fruit's sort of been picked. You know, and we're like, very much like the cotton industry. If you look what happened in the cotton industry, they almost got shut down. And they didn't get there just through BMP. They had some massive technological leaps. Bollguard, you know, Roundup Ready, integrated pest management. They got rid of endosulfan. You know, we need something. And we were looking to EEF. You know, I think we're all hanging our hats on something like enhanced efficiency fertilisers. But we all got to iron up. The government has to iron up, I think, and say 2050 and P2R, 2050 targets are unattainable unless we have a technological leap. We're at where we're at, and